America's reaction to Ferguson. Good morning, and thanks for getting up with us this Saturday morning. Overnight, the streets of Ferguson, Missouri were calm for a third straight night. Violence between police and protesters is continuing to subside after almost 2 weeks of clashes that erupted after a police officer shot and killed an unarmed teenager named Michael Brown. Last night, instead of confrontation, several protesters stopped to talk with officers about Brown's death. There is, of course, fear that anger could once again ignite if the grand jury that is now hearing evidence in that case, if that grand jury does not return a charge against the officer in question, Darren Wilson. We'll have a lot more on how that case is proceeding legally later in the show. But we want to begin this morning by talking about how Americans have been reacting to the shooting in Ferguson and to the protests that have followed. In a New York Times poll this week, Americans appear evenly divided on the police response to the protest. 32% of those surveyed said the officers went too far. 33%, about the same number, believe the police response has been about right, and 15% say police did not go far enough. In contrast, 59% of those surveyed believe that protesters' actions went too far. 20% feel they were just about right, and 7% say they didn't go far enough. And finally, when it comes to the investigation by local authorities into the shooting of Michael Brown, 56%, a majority, have confidence it will be conducted fairly, while 34% don't share that confidence. Joining me now to discuss Ferguson, the week's other big stories, we have with us today John Stanton, the Washington bureau chief for Buzzfeed, political strategist L. Joy Williams, and MSNBC contributor Josh Barro, who's also a domestic correspondent with the New York Times. So those are the headline numbers, but I think the other headline that goes hand in hand with it is a clear racial divide on these questions. You know, the country, that suggests agreement there, but the real story in those numbers is when you ask, do you think the officers used, do you think Officer Wilson might have used excessive force here? I think the number was like 55% among African Americans, something like 11% among whites. That was the biggest one I saw, but there's a whole bunch of those. So that really seems to be the story here, that really two different stories of this have kind of made it out there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think it's reflective of different personal experiences with the police. I think when you talk with white people in the U.S. about their own and their family members' experiences with the police, they generally haven't had experiences of feeling mistreated and of feeling like they were being, systematically unable to trust the police. So I think it's this gut-level question, do you trust police officers to have made good decisions about these sorts of things? And I think you ask white people that, and they're much more likely to say yes than if you ask black people, and that drives that big poll difference and the whole difference in perception about whether people in Ferguson are reasonably upset about something or not.
Well, there was, I don't know if it was the New York Times CBS poll. There was another poll I saw this week that was basically asking, have you had an encounter with police where you felt the police treated you unfairly? And I think among blacks it was like 60% yes. Among whites it was 7%. So, I mean, that really might be the story of how this
7 people is probably in the entire.
Well, I should point out there was a margin of error of plus or minus 4 points as well.
Yeah.
So it's 7 could be.
And to your point, that is exactly right. And what these incidents and sort of what this tragic incident of a young man losing his life through, I say murder, right, is it kind of shows nationwide, again, this problem, this different view that different people have based on race of how they are treated in this country. And particularly what enrages me, and I use that word very carefully, but, it's very accurate, about the response has been the sort of overuse of the police officers against people peacefully protesting, and how for African Americans, when we protest, when we do anything, we're all lumped together. Right? There is no separation. So the protesters then become looters, and everyone is looting. Everyone is committing violence. There is no separation.
When you see that poll number, that did the protesters go too far? Do you think that those things are being merged in people's minds?
Absolutely, right? Yeah. Because then there is no reasonable response to this tragedy happening. There's, if one violent act is committed, if someone, or a handful of people out of thousands of people break into a store, it now becomes, those protesters. And, so to separate that out, people don't do that. And even the news coverage of that sort of lumps it up together. It doesn't separate out that there are individuals taking advantage of the situation, but in the larger context, these are people in this community protesting a violent act that was committed against an armed citizen.
Well, I think part of the thing, I think, is this is a post-9/11 situation. If you look right now, it's interesting that we're sort of going back into this security situation with ISIS and the country sort of retrenching. And I think the white community has long been much more comfortable with the idea of having a police state, especially sort of after 9/11. You saw it in how people talked about, you know, the surveillance systems and how the federal government and local governments were operating, and it was a much harder push to this sort of, okay, look, we're fine with having the police on the streets, whereas in minority communities, it has always been sort of a thing that people looked at and were like, this is kind of...
Although the one thing in this poll, the one place where there seemed to be a pretty good overlap, black and white, was on the questions, militarization of police question, and should... I mean, I found out that the police force in my hometown in Massachusetts, about 10,000 people, has 2 M16s. You know, people are fighting grenade launchers in another police department in Massachusetts. I saw that this week as well. I think people are looking at that because in this poll it showed blacks and whites almost in equal numbers were bothered by that. That seems to be the one.
And I think that's been sort of the politically safe place for national politicians to jump in on this. Everybody sort of looks at this and says, gee, I don't understand why they need a tank. But I think that actually sort of gets at the racial divide, because people can look at this and say this militarization is over the top and should be rolled back. But the negative interactions that African Americans are having with the police are not mostly about the police having tanks and gas masks. This is an unusual situation. I think the bigger and more important question is about ordinary, everyday policing and whether that is being done in a racially just way. And I think that's where the huge gap remains. I'm hopeful that we will see some positive federal change on the police militarization stuff. Maybe the federal government will stop giving surplus tanks to police departments. Maybe we can get police to stop dressing in camouflage. But I think the everyday policing part is a much tougher nut to crack, because I think there's a real failure to communicate on it.
And that's the point, is sort of bringing to the larger movement in terms of what civil rights organizations and other activists across the country are sort of taking this moment to be. You know, we've been talking about this for years. You know, the interaction that local law enforcement have with communities of color across the country, and how our communities are over-policed, the excessive force used, right? So we're using this moment to highlight that, and there are demands from, I think, about 13 civil rights organizations signed on to a statement with requests asking for the Justice Department to do an investigation across the country about the use of excessive force, particularly among unarmed African Americans, asking for sort of a systematic way in how these cases, like what happened in Ferguson, are treated, and so when they're taken out of the hands of local prosecutors and sort of prosecuted from the Justice Department. So there are all of these demands, something that we've been talking about for years, and so now being able to take this moment and use that. And I agree with you that we can't let people off the hook, including Democrats, because this is, a state run by a Democratic governor, that we can't let people off the hook and just have them focus on the militarization of the police. It's larger than that.
Right. No, there's a lot of...
The larger issue is how law enforcement deals with African Americans and not seeing all of us as criminals.
Right. Well, there is a major national political figure who's speaking out on Ferguson, as well as another pressing national issue right now. That's Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, an eye doctor by training. He's on a medical mission to Guatemala this week to perform pro bono eye surgery. And the Republican presidential hopeful had this to say about former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's recent comments on foreign policy.
If you want to see a transformational election in our country, let the Democrats put forward a war hawk like Hillary Clinton, and you'll see a transformation like you've never seen.
So that's Rand Paul speaking from Guatemala. The full interview is going to be on Meet the Press tomorrow, and this is transitioning, by the way, to the other things that were in the news this week. But so last week the news was sort of about Hillary Clinton maybe distancing herself a little bit from the Obama administration on foreign policy. The idea of don't do stupid stuff is not a global vision. And now you've got Rand Paul basically saying, well, if she's sending sort of hawkish signals on the Democratic side, maybe there's room for me potentially, that's what I'm hearing at least in this interview, there's room for me potentially to maybe get anti-interventionist people who traditionally are on the left into my camp.
I think that the foreign policy has been the one place where he has struggled. I mean, he's sort of gone back and forth. You know, like last week it was, does he support taking away all of Israel's funding? Does he not support it? He sort of said yes, and he sort of said no, and then he said, well, maybe, if you read everything in context. And now there's this where he's sort of seems to be moving back towards a more sort of isolationist position. And I think it's been interesting that people thought this was going to be one of his strongest areas, sort of going into this election. And right now, he seems to be struggling with a way to figure out how to like define himself. And so maybe he's hoping that Hillary does that for him without him having to figure it out on his own.
Is there room for that? I mean, is it realistic for a guy like Rand Paul to think I could pick off people who've been voting Democratic because of foreign policy?
Well, I think, yeah, possibly. I think that there are some people on the left who the issue they care most deeply about is foreign policy. They were very upset about the Bush administration's sort of misadventures and would like someone to not get us involved in foreign wars. I think there's distrust of Hillary on that. I think it's also one of the issues where the electorate has the weakest point of view. The electorate can be swung from a very pro-war position to a very anti-war position within a number of years in a way that people don't move on the economy and on social issues. So I think part of the reason that Rand Paul's been tentative is that we don't know where the electorate is going to stand going into 2015, 2016. I think over the last couple of years, people have been very hesitant toward intervention, but you could have another attack on U.S. soil that could swing opinions right back again. And so I think all the candidates, or many of the candidates, are doing this to an extent. They're trying to keep their options open so they can be more hawkish or more dovish, depending on.
No, that's what I've been wondering about with ISIS. When the way ISIS is being talked up now, even by this administration, and we're going to have more on this later in the show. But just the idea that this is a threat beyond something we've seen from Al Qaeda. This is something that's bigger in scope potentially than Al Qaeda. Really talking about it as an existential threat. And I wonder, and you look at a horrible incidents like the video that came out this week, and you look at that and you say, does that start to move people and say, well, we don't want another Iraq, but they start to say again, we don't want another 9/11.
Right, and clearly, I mean, it's foreign policy issues is one instance where you can show some clear differences between Hillary Clinton and sort of any other candidate in either the primary or in, because, most people argue that everybody starts to sound the same and kind of everybody, they can't choose. But sort of foreign policy is the one issue in which there are clear differences in terms of the ideology of Hillary Clinton and any other folks who may be in the race. Additionally, Rand Paul, obviously making signals that he's, running towards that time, has some, where people on the left may agree with him on some social issues, right? And so they may, so I agree with you on some social issues. Now you're talking my language on this foreign policy thing. I'm more likely to listen to, what you have to say and may consider you as an option. But whether or not someone, clearly, solidly on the left sort of makes a transition and a move to Rand Paul, that remains to be seen.
All right, well, we have a few more things in the news this week we want to get to, including one about Rick Perry. We'll pick it up as soon as we come back.